Today's topic, do you enjoy solo gaming, or is it something that you find you have to force yourself to do? Welcome to TABLEscraps, short discussions about board, card, and tabletop gaming, submitted by the viewing audience and discussed with the viewing audience. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of TABLEscraps, the show where I discuss topics about tabletop, card, and board gaming with the live streaming YouTube audience. And the topics we discuss are also submitted by the live streaming YouTube audience, and today's topic is no exception. Today's topic O discussion comes from viewer Ethan Yanyo, who says, solo games. Do you like them? Do you play them? If yes, what are your favorite games to play by yourself? With a seemingly increasing number of games being released as solo games or with solo variants, is this a good thing for the hobby? Could it be a bad thing? And speaking of which, what's your opinion on official solo modes to games as opposed to fan-made solo variants? Woo! That's a lot of good questions about solo gaming, Ethan, so let's dig right into it. I want to be more of a fan of games designed specifically to be played solo than I find that I actually am. I own a copy of Friday by Friedman Fries, which is a very popular solo game. And I got that because, you know, there's times I like playing games and there's times that I don't have other people to play games with. So I figure, hey, I'll get some solo games and I will play them, you know, like maybe while I'm watching TV or something, or just when no one else is around. I have yet to actually play Friday. It's in a box in a shelf now at this point, just kind of, you know, tucked away because it never hit the table, because I like the idea of solo games a lot more than I like solo games themselves. You know, I'm sure the game is fine, but if I ever do find myself playing solo games, what I find that I do is I will play a multiplayer game and I'll just take on the roles of multiple players in it. Famous example, well, not famous, personal example of this is how I would play Risk when I was growing up. We lived, you know, out in the country on like 5 acres. And so, you know, our nearest neighbor was a 10-minute walk away. So, you know, I didn't have a lot of people over or a gaming group or anything when I was in middle or high school, but we did have Risk in the house and I liked playing Risk. So I would set up Risk and I would set like a 6-player game of Risk, and I would just come up with personalities for each of the different countries and stuff, and each one would have their own agenda and prerogative and such. That's how I would play it. I would take the multiplayer game of Risk and I would play a multiplayer game of it just by myself. So that's probably why I prefer that approach to solo gaming as opposed to breaking out a game that was designed specifically to be a solo game or a solo variant of a multiplayer game. But that's just my experience with it and where I'm at. Now, I want to compare my history with everyone else who's joining us in the chat. So let's get right over to the chat and find out what people are saying about their own experiences and preferences solo gaming. We're going to start off with Dragonfire Beard, who says, solo games have come from necessity at my house. Between conflicting schedules with my significant other and the baby you've had to get creative with your baby. Between conflicting schedules with my significant other and the baby, I've had to get creative. My favorites include Seventh Continent, Gloomhaven, or This War of Mine. Wow! Now those are some heavy-duty, intense games that you have been playing solo there. I'm really interested, you know, to find out how much differently do you need to play them? How differently do you have to approach these when you play them solo? Is it a big difference? Do you have to come up with a bunch of homegrown rules? That's one of the things I'm really curious about. Steven mentions, the first big investment for solo gaming was the latest Seventh Continent. I need the solo game to have an easier setup time and teardown time. I think Steven brings up a good point because it seems like more and more games recently actually are listing the number of players on the box. Instead of being 2 to X number of players, 1 to X number of players. So I get the impression, at least the last, I don't know, year and a half, I've seen more games that as the games are designed, they seem to be designed with solo play in mind, which is a really encouraging, nice thing to see, actually, that can facilitate more solo play. Meeple Critic mentions, a problem I have with solo games is the concept of accountability. In regular games, I am accountable to my opponents. In solo, I am more inclined to redo turns or quote-unquote cheat, and it ruins it a bit for me. Ooh, that's a really, really good example of a potential issue with solo games that you don't necessarily have with other ones. Yes, that's that personal accountability. I encountered the same issue when I do it. You know, something will happen, and sometimes I will reset or undo just for the sake of telling a better story or seeing something neat happen. So yeah, it's like you know, when you work for yourself. You know, being your own boss is fun, except that when you call in sick, you always know that you're lying. So the same thing when you're playing a game by yourself. If you cheat, there's no one else really to disappoint, so it makes it a lot more tempting to do. Really, like I said, I think it really just boils down to what you are solo gaming for. Is it to beat a puzzle, or is it to have an experience? And if it's to tell a story and have an experience, I think that there's a little more leeway there. But if you're trying to solve a puzzle, well, that's something that each of us has to figure out for ourselves when we're in that situation, what our priorities are going to be. Dan joins us to say that he loves solo gaming. He says, I enjoy playing games made exclusively for solo, but greatly appreciate the industry's tendency to include solo variants in traditional multiplayer games. That's excellent, Dan. And actually, since you are someone who enjoys solo gaming a lot, I pose a question to you, which perhaps you can answer later in the chat or in the comments if we run out of time. Have you found that publishers and designers within the last couple of years have started introducing solo variants and rules for that more frequently? Is this something we're seeing more of now, or is it just that I'm becoming aware of it and I never noticed it before, but it's always been there? Let me know what you think about that in the comments below. And not just Dan, everyone is invited to share their opinion on that as well. Stephen also mentions, I'm with Chaz also on liking the idea of solo. I think I'm going to just always play the solo game, but I always just end up with video games, TV, phone apps, etc. I still solo, but not as much. That's another really good point is when it comes to solo gaming, the convenience of just playing a video game or an app on your phone, that also does kind of play into it for myself, at least. You know, if I'm going to do an activity on my own, instead of breaking out, setting up, refamiliarizing myself with rules and everything and setting up a game, I'm probably going to just take my phone, or if I'm at the computer, boot up a game that has less teardown setup time and stuff. And so that also definitely plays a big part into it. Demo Weasel says, I play solo games quite a bit. I even break new games out on the table to play them by myself as a way to learn them and also get the experience I need to teach them more effectively. Oh, thank you for reminding me of that, Demo Weasel, because when I play solo games today, that is usually the primary reason why, to basically teach myself a new game. I have found personally that breaking out the game and playing a couple of solo rounds of it is one of the best ways for me to learn a game and also get the tools and information I need to teach it. So I'm right with you there, Demo Weasel, that I like using that as a method of learning a game. That's definitely has potential for a good learning device. Kubuki mentions, back in the day, solo gaming was fairly common in the wargaming world. You'd simply play both sides. If a game has a solo mode, I will often try that out while learning the game because it helps me get the rules down well before I introduce it to my group. I can see that because when I would play like Risk, you know, I would play multiple sides. But if you're wargaming with, I don't know, it just seems different to me if there's two sides, because can the player really be that objective, retain their objectivity to not secretly or subconsciously start rooting for one side to win more than the other? Is it possible for someone playing a two-sided game like that to retain their objectivity? I don't know. Let me know what your experiences on that have been, because that would be a really interesting discussion with some examples, one way or the other, of what's happened with that. But in the meantime, let's continue on to Trevin, who says, should certain digital games be included in this discussion? The Risk video game has a campaign mode with objectives, not just AI like an app. XCOM and Civ are just digital board games too. If we're going this far in the discussion, we might as well be all inclusive of any type of solo gaming. You know, even if it's going to be something like, you know, jump rope. Never mind. makes no sense. Are you going to double dutch it, or are you going to jump by yourself? You know, you have the opportunity to involve more people in jumping rope. That is literally, honestly, truly the train of thought I had, and that was the argument I was going to make. And even before it came out of my mouth, I realized how ridiculous it was. So let's continue on to the next comment. Let's continue on with Mike Jones. No, really, that's the next comment that shiny icon and hashtag caught my eye. He says, you know, that's a toughie. About 80% of my games are solo playable. Off the top of my head, I could say Galaxy Defenders because the AI is amazing. The story and production, not so much. You present an interesting conundrum. You know, if 80% of your games are solo playable, what are the 20% that aren't? And what is the determining factor that makes a game solo playable or not? Is it something that we can distill down and have a definitive answer for, or is that going to vary from person to person? That is definitely something I would like to revisit either in the comments or perhaps in a future episode. Action Troll says, I like the idea of solo gaming, and I have a couple of Kickstarters on their way, but I fear that the setup and teardown will get in the way. Well, yeah, exactly. We've touched on that, you know, and I wonder when they finally come in, you know, follow up in the comments and let me know, after you've played them a few times, does the amount of setup time and teardown time, you know, do you still stick with those games, or does that cause those solo games to fade and you find yourself doing something else instead that doesn't require that setup and teardown time? I'm going to use you as my little guinea pig for that experiment. So, you know, let me know, because all of us now, all of us are depending on you. Cassandra joins us to say, I don't buy dedicated solo games. I prefer to play video games instead. However, a solo variant is a deciding factor to buy a game for me. Oh boy, that's awesome. There's a prime example of gamer think right there. I don't buy dedicated ones. I will play video games instead. But if I see it as an option, oh, it's an option, I'll buy that thing right up. I am, like so many others, am guilty of falling into that same mindset as well. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I'm not making fun or anything or putting anyone down. I think it's just a very interesting way that our minds, especially as gamers, seem to work. And I think it's fascinating that we don't necessarily want to play the game solo, but dang it, if we have the option for it, that's a plus. I think that's pretty interesting. Peter mentions, there are a handful of solo-only games that are appealing to me, but I tend to appreciate games that can be either multiplayer or solo, even with a variant. Yeah, I can see that. And I wonder if that is the consensus. There's always this stigma with like your educational games. And I wonder that, oh no, an educational game can't be as good as a regular game because it's educational and it's not going to be as fun. I wonder if there's a similar stigma with solo games. Solo game can't be as fun and as engaging as a game for multiplayers because it's just made for solo and so it can't be as good. I wonder if there's a similar stigma there or if it's just me. We may never know, because I'm moving on to the next comment, which is from Dragonfire Beard, who says, Chaz, who's me, hi, I don't find that I have to house rule too many of my heavy games. This war of mine pretty much flows easily, while Gloomhaven or Seventh Continent has more thinking involved to make your move. Oh, okay, well, thank you. That follows up on the previous question of mine really well. So thank you very much for following up on that. Mike Jones really says, you can always use solo play to iron out your own understanding of the rules or refresh it before teaching a game. Absolutely, absolutely agree. And finally, we are going to wrap up with a post by Christopher who says, I like when solo mode can add a real story to a game that doesn't normally have that, like the Renegade app adds to Clank in space. That's a really good point too. And that kind of brings us all around full circle back to my beginning point of that, the experience of playing a solo game. Even if it is a multiplayer game that you're playing by yourself, filling multiple roles, does give an opportunity, definitely, for a different type of gaming experience. I believe that doing that taking that approach allows a more story-driven narrative when you play, because it's all up to you. And you have more leeway to maybe bend the rules or house rule some things or do, and even if you don't do those things, it gives the opportunity to really have a narrative, story-driven experience if you want. But again, perhaps it just depends on the people you play with. I mean, there's people I play with in my game group that when I walk away from a game, I will have just as many stories and feelings and interesting moments as I would playing by myself. So again, it's going to vary from player to player, from playgroup to playgroup, and of course, from game to game. But what's really important is that these games are getting played and that we have had the opportunity to talk about it, because that's what this is all about. Not just the show, but gaming in general. So I want to thank everybody who's taken the time today to stop by and have this chat with me. And until the next time that we get together, I want to remind everyone out there watching that shows just like this are made possible by viewers just like you who have been supporting Pair of Dice Paradise's Pod Pledge fundraiser. Every contribution helps, every shout out, every tweet about it also helps, and it's all greatly appreciated. So thank you so much. Until the next time that we get a chance to get together and talk about gaming, whether solo, multiplayer, or what have you, I've been Chaz Marler, and take care. Hey there, everybody! Welcome back to another episode of Table Scraps, the show here where we do stuff with people like you. Did I mention that I'm going to do that over? Just say the intro in Wookiee talk. I'm more Porg than Wookiee, unfortunately. Because yes, I'm going to try and cash in on those sweet clicks. I'm not above that.